Welcome to Vicky Whispers, your cozy corner for peaceful evenings and restful nights. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable position, whether you're lying in a bed, resting on a couch, or sitting in your favorite chair. Adjust your pillows, wrap yourself in a warm blanket, and let your body feel supported and at ease. Now, let's take a deep breath together. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold for a moment and slowly release it through your mouth. Feel your shoulders soften, your jaw unclench, and the weight of the day begin to melt away. Close your eyes if you wish, or let your gaze soften on a fixed point. Let each breath you take guide you closer to calmness, like gentle waves washing over the shore, each one quieter than the last. This is your time, your sanctuary, to let go of everything you've carried today. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, except here. My voice will be your guide as we wander through a soothing story, crafted to quiet the mind and prepare your body for a deep, restful sleep. With each word, let yourself drift a little deeper into comfort and relaxation. You are safe, you are calm, and you are ready to let the world fade away. Now, let's begin. Hansel and Grethel, modified and read by Viktor Hejna. Deep within the heart of an ancient forest, there stood a small, weather-beaten cottage, where a poor woodcutter lived with his wife and 2 children. The boy, a curious and resourceful lad, was named Hansel, while his younger sister, Grethel, was a tender-hearted girl with a quiet strength about her. Life for the family was never easy, but they managed to scrape by until the day misfortune fell over the land like a heavy shadow. The forest, once bountiful with game and wild fruits, had grown eerily quiet. A great famine gripped the region, with stores of grain dwindling to nothing and bread becoming a luxury few could afford. Every day the woodcutter returned home with less hope in his heart. Each evening the family huddled around the faint warmth of their meager heart, sharing whatever scraps they could find. But it was never enough. Late one night, as the stars blinked coldly above the forest canopy, the woodcutter lay awake in his bed, racked with despair. His wife stood beside him, her tone sharp with frustration as she confronted the dire truth neither of them could ignore. "Husband," she began, her voice low but firm, "we cannot go on like this. The children grow thinner by the day, and soon there will be nothing left for any of us. If we continue as we are, we will all starve." The woodcutter groaned, burying his face in his hands. "What can we do? They are our children. I cannot bear the thought of abandoning them to the mercy of the wild. The forest is cruel, filled with beasts and dangers. Better a quick end for them than this slow death for us all," she snapped. "Tomorrow we take them deep into the forest, where the trees are thickest. We leave them there with a small meal. They'll be unable to find their way back, and we will have one less burden to bear." He turned to her, his eyes wide with anguish. "No, I cannot agree to such cruelty. They are but children. And what will your mercy gain us?" she retorted. "4 coffins instead of 2. If you truly love them, you'll see the wisdom in this." Her words gnawed at him through the night, relentless as the wolves that prowled the forest edge. At last, worn down by exhaustion and her bitter insistence, he relented. "I will do as you ask," he whispered hoarsely, "but my heart will never forgive me." Unbeknownst to them, Hansel and Grethel lay awake in their small loft above. Hunger had kept them from sleep, and they heard every whispered word of their parents' conversation. Grethel clung to her brother, tears streaking her pale cheeks. "What will become of us now, Hansel? They mean to leave us to die." Hansel's jaw tightened, though fear clawed at his chest. He resolved to protect his sister. "Don't cry, Grethel," he whispered. "I'll find a way to keep us safe. I promise." As soon as the household fell silent, Hansel slipped from his bed. The moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the yard outside. There, scattered like tiny stars on the ground, lay smooth white pebbles. Quietly he crept out of the door and gathered as many as his small hands could hold, stuffing them into his coat pockets. Returning to the loft, he whispered to Grethel, "Sleep now, little sister. We'll be all right." At dawn, their stepmother woke them roughly, thrusting a small piece of bread into each of their hands. "Get up," she ordered. "We're going into the forest to fetch wood. This will be your meal for the day. Make it last." The children exchanged a knowing glance, but said nothing. Hansel slipped the bread into Grethel's apron and followed their parents out into the cold morning air. As they walked deeper into the forest, Hansel lingered at the back of the group, occasionally turning to glance behind him. Each time he dropped one of his precious pebbles, marking their path with glimmers of white against the dark soil. By midday they reached a small clearing. "Here," the woodcutter said, gruffly, avoiding his children's eyes. "Pile up some wood for a fire. It'll keep you warm while we work." Hansel and Grethel dutifully gathered fallen branches, stacking them into a neat pile. Soon flames crackled and danced in the crisp air. Their warmth, a small comfort against the growing chill in their hearts. Their stepmother pressed them to sit by the fire and rest, her tone deceptively kind. "We'll be back soon," she assured them. "Just wait here." As the couple disappeared into the trees, the children sat quietly, nibbling at their bread. They could hear the rhythmic sound of chopping wood in the distance, but Hansel was suspicious. Looking closely at the trees, he noticed a withered branch swinging at the breeze, tied to creak and thump like an axe at work. He said nothing to Grethel, not wanting to alarm her. Hours passed and the fire dwindled. Weariness overtook them, and they fell asleep against the dwindling embers. When they woke, darkness had swallowed the forest, and the air was heavy with the sounds of unseen creatures. Grethel began to cry softly. "How will we find our way home now, Hansel?" "Don't worry," Hansel said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Wait until the moon rises, then we'll follow the path I made." As the silver light of the moon pierced through the trees, the pebbles glittered like a trail of stars, guiding them back through the forest. They walked through the night, holding tightly to each other. At dawn, they reached the small cottage. Their stepmother's face twisted in surprise as she opened the door. "So, you found your way back," she muttered, her tone sour. But their father, seeing them safe, swept them into his arms, his guilt and relief spilling over in tears. Not long after their return home, famine struck again, its grip tighter and more merciless than before. The last crumbs of hope in the woodcutter's cottage dwindled alongside their meager provisions. One night, as darkness cloaked the forest and silence fell over the household, the children overheard a hushed yet heated conversation between their parents. The mother's voice, sharp and determined, pierced through the stillness. Everything is gone. There is nothing left but half a loaf of bread. And after that, there is only death. We must take the children deeper into the forest this time, farther than before, where they won't find their way back. It's the only way we can survive. The father groaned softly, the weight of guilt and desperation pressing on him like a boulder. Would it not be better to share our last meal with them, no matter how small? How can we abandon them again? His voice wavered with anguish, but he lacked the strength to argue further. He had yielded once. The path of resistance now seemed too steep. The woman, hardened by her fear of starvation, brushed aside his pleas. We've started this, and we must see it through. Do you think their survival makes our suffering more bearable? Say what you will, but it's decided. The children, lying awake in their shared corner of the house, heard every word. Grethel clung to her brother, trembling with sorrow and dread. "They're going to leave us again," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hansel rubbed his arm protectively around her. "Don't worry, Grethel," he murmured. "We'll find a way, just like before. Sleep now. The forest may be vast, but we're clever." But when the household finally fell silent, and Hansel tried to slip outside to gather the gleaming pebbles that had saved them before, he found the door firmly locked. Their mother had anticipated his plan. Frustrated but undeterred, he returned to Grethel's side and whispered, "Trust me, sister. Good fortune will guide us." At dawn, their mother roused them sharply. "Up, you lazy bones," she snapped, thrusting smaller than ever pieces of bread into their hands. "That's all you'll have today, so don't gobble it up too soon." Hansel slipped his bread into his pocket, a plan already forming, while Grethel clenched hers tightly, afraid even to look at it. The journey into the forest was longer this time, the paths twisting and unfamiliar. Hansel, feigning clumsiness, frequently lagged behind to scatter crumbs from his pocket onto the ground. Each morsel fell as a marker, a silent cry for salvation. The woman, irritated by his dawdling, barked at him to keep up, but he ignored her. At last, they reached a dense and shadowy part of the forest, deeper than they had ever been before. Their father, silent and forlorn, built another fire. The flames licked hungrily at the dry wood, casting fleeting warmth against the encroaching chill. "Stay here, children," their mother commanded. "When we finish our work, we'll return for you." The fire crackled and roared, but the promise of their return felt like a lie, heavy and oppressive, as the echoes of their parents' footsteps faded into the forest. Grethel shared her bread with Hansel, who had none left to eat. They huddled together, their small bodies trembling with cold and fear, until exhaustion overcame them. When they awoke, the moon was high, its pale light filtering through the trees. Hansel gently shook Grethel awake. "We'll find our way back," he reassured her. "The crumbs will lead us." But as they retraced their steps, their hope crumbled alongside their trail. The ground was bare, the crumbs had vanished, devoured by birds unseen. Hansel swallowed his panic, hiding his fear from his sister. "We'll find another way," he insisted, though the path ahead was uncertain and dark. For 2 days and nights they wandered the endless forest. Their feet grew raw and blistered, their stomachs hollow with hunger. The berries they managed to scavenge provided little relief. Despair loomed over them like a storm cloud. Yet Hansel held fast to his resolve, refusing to let Grethel see his weakening spirit. On the 3rd day, just as hope began to fade entirely, they spotted a snow-white bird perched on a low branch. Its song was hauntingly beautiful, a melody that seemed to beacon them forward. They followed it, driven by a strange mixture of desperation and enchantment. The bird flew ahead, its wings glinting like polished ivory in the sunlight, until it led them to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a house, unlike any they had ever seen. Its walls were made of gingerbread, its roof adorned with tiles of sugar-glazed cakes. Clear panes of crystallized sugar framed its windows, shimmering like jewels. The children stared in awe, their hunger momentarily forgotten in their disbelief. Finally, Hansel broke the silence. "We've been saved," he said, reaching for a piece of the roof. "Let's eat." Grethel hesitated only a moment before breaking off a corner of a sugar window. The sweetness flooded her senses, and she could not resist taking another bite. As they ate, a faint voice drifted from within the house. "Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who's nibbling at my door?" The children froze, their hearts pounding, but seeing no immediate danger, they resumed their feast. Moments later, the door creaked open, and out stepped an ancient woman, hunched and frail, her eyes a dull red that seemed to pierce the darkness. "Oh, my dear children," she crooned, her voice syrupy and warm. "Who brought you to my little home? Come inside and rest. You look so tired, so hungry. Let me care for you." Weary, but too exhausted to resist, the children allowed her to lead them inside. The interior was just as magical as the outside, filled with the aromas of baked goods and spices. She set before them a feast: pancakes dripping with syrup, warm milk, and bowls of apples and nuts. Then she showed them to 2 soft beds, layered with clean white linens. That night, Hansel and Grethel slept deeply, feeling for the first time in days safe and cared for. Little did they know, their nightmare had only just begun, for the kindly old woman was not what she seemed. She was a witch, ancient and cruel, who lured children into her home to fatten and devour them. Her house of sweets was a trap, and her hospitality a deception. As the children slept, the witch whispered to herself, her laughter low and menacing. "They are mine now," she muttered, her red eyes gleaming with hunger, "and they shall not escape me again." As dawn broke, a pale light crept into the witch's decrepit cottage, illuminating its warped wooden walls and grimy windows. What was once a gingerbread house has now revealed its true form. The air was thick with the lingering scent of herbs and spices, remnants of strange concoctions the old woman brewed in her cauldron. While Hansel and Grethel still lay sleeping, curled up in a corner of a ragged blanket, the witch was already awake. Her gnarled fingers stroked the edge of her crooked staff, and she stared at the children. The sight of their rosy cheeks and youthful vitality filled her with twisted delight. "They'll make a fine meal," she muttered to herself, her cracked lips curling into a sinister smile. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, glinted with a wicked light as she planned her next move. Without hesitation, she shuffled toward Hansel and seized him with her bony, claw-like hands. The boy startled awake, his heart pounding as she dragged him through the shadowy cottage. He shouted for help, but his cries were muffled by the oppressive stillness of the forest outside. Grethel awoke to to the noise and scrambled after them, but the witch was far too quick. She shoved Hansel into a small iron cage outside, locking it with a heavy rusted key. The cage was barely large enough for him to sit upright, and the iron bars dug into his skin whenever he tried to move. The witch turned to Grethel, her voice sharp and commanding. "You lazy girl, get up and fetch water. Your brother is to be fattened up, and you will cook for him. Do it, or you'll meet the same fate." Tears welled up in Grethel's eyes as she listened to the witch's orders, but she dared not defy her. She shuffled to the well, her small hands trembling as she pulled the bucket up. The weight of the situation pressed on her chest like a stone. Back in the kitchen, the witch was already bustling around, preparing meals for Hansel with an unsettling fervor. The best meats, the freshest bread, and even sweets were set aside for him. Grethel, however, was given only scraps and hardened bits of bread that seemed as old as the cottage itself. Days turned into weeks, and the routine became grueling. Each morning the witch would hobble over to Hansel's cage, her thin, pale fingers reaching through the bars. "Let me feel your finger," she would demand, her voice dripping with impatience. But Hansel, ever clever, had found a way to outwit her. He used a chicken bone he had found near the cage, poking it through the bars instead of his finger. The witch, nearly blind, would feel the thin, brittle bone and crumble. Still too skinny, more food. Meanwhile, Grethel grew weaker with every passing day. The witch's cruelty left her gaunt and exhausted, but her determination to save her brother kept her going. At night, when the cottage was silent, she would kneel beside her straw bed and whisper prayers for help. She clung to the faint hope that she could outsmart the witch and escape this nightmare. By the 4th week, the witch could no longer contain her impatience. The fire in her stove crackled and hissed, mirroring her growing frustration. "Enough," she snarled one morning, slamming her fists on the wooden table. "Fat or thin, the boy will do. Tomorrow I'll feast." She turned to Grethel, who was scrubbing the floor, and barked, "Go, fetch water and light the oven. We bake today." As Grethel obeyed, her heart sank. She knew time was running out. She thought of the family they had lost and the bond she shared with Hansel. She couldn't let the witch win, but what could she do? The witch's every move was calculated, and her cunning was unmatched. That afternoon, the witch began preparing the oven. Her hunched figure, silhouetted against the fiery glow of the flames. She kneaded dough with surprising strength, her hands moving swiftly despite their gnarled appearance. She then turned to Grethel, her voice sharp. "Check the oven. Crawl inside and see if it's hot enough." Grethel froze, realizing the witch's true intent. If she climbed into the oven, she would never come out. Her mind raced for a way to turn the tables. I don't know how to check," she stammered, feigning innocence. "Could you show me?" The witch, impatient and irritated, muttered under her breath, "Foolish child. Fine, I'll show you how it's done." She bent down, her frail frame creaking as she leaned toward the oven's open mouth. The heat singed the edges of her tattered cloak, but she paid it no mind. As she stretched forward to demonstrate, Grethel summoned every ounce of strength she had. With a mighty push, she shoved the witch into the blazing oven. The old woman shrieked, a bone-chilling sound that echoed through the forest. Flames engulfed her in an instant, and the door slammed shut behind her. Grethel stumbled back, her chest heaving as she stared at the locked oven door. For the first time in weeks, the cottage fell silent. Wasting no time, Grethel ran to Hansel's cage. Her fingers fumbled with the rusty lock, but desperation gave her strength. At last, the door swung open and Hansel tumbled out. He wrapped his arms around his sister, their relief pouring out in sobs. "We're free," Grethel whispered, her voice trembling. "It's over." Inside the witch's cottage, they discovered treasures beyond their wildest dreams. Golden coins, glittering jewels, and precious artifacts. The siblings filled their pockets, knowing these riches would help them rebuild their lives. As they left the cottage behind, the forest no longer seemed as dark or threatening. The sunlight filtered through the trees, guiding them home. After hours of walking, they reached a wide river. A gentle white duck appeared, as if summoned by their need. One by one, it ferried them across, its feathers soft and warm beneath them. On the other side, the landscape grew more familiar. Soon they saw their father's house in the distance. When they burst through the door, their father fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had been racked with guilt and grief since the day he abandoned them. The siblings poured out their story, their voices overlapping in excitement. As they emptied their pockets, the room sparkled with the light of the treasures they had brought. From that day forward, their lives were transformed. The forest, once a place of fear and despair, became a symbol of their resilience and courage. Together, they built a future filled with love and hope, vowing never to let darkness overtake them again.